Konnichiwa, Mina. And now it's time for Week 18 of the 2016 PFA season, the week of December 11th and 12th. But before we begin, we gotta take a look at the standings after last week. So then here's the standings after the first 17 weeks. In the National East, Washington, who has won the division last week, has still a 3-game lead over Boston. No, 3-game lead over Boston in the National East. Omaha still has a 6-game lead over Denver in the National Central. Birmingham now takes over lead against Atlanta by a game in the National South. And Phoenix has the tiebreaker over Los Angeles in the National West. In the Century East, Baltimore has a half-a-game lead over Pittsburgh. Chicago has a 3-game lead over Minneapolis in the Century Central. New Orleans has a 1-game lead over Dallas in the Century South. And San Diego has a 1-game lead over San Francisco in the Century West. Now we take a look at the playoff standings in the National Conference first, where Omaha still has a 3-game lead over Phoenix and Washington for the first seed, as Phoenix has the 2nd seed, Washington has the 3rd seed, Birmingham now has the 4th seed, Los Angeles still has the 5th seed, and Atlanta now has the 6th seed. Now for playoff clinching scenarios, Omaha can clinch a first-round bye if either Washington or Phoenix lose, but they can clinch home field advantage if Washington and Phoenix lose or they win. All they need to do is just win one more game and they clinch it all. Or maybe they can do it this week. Phoenix can clinch a playoff spot if they just win. Los Angeles can clinch a playoff spot if they win. Hell, Birmingham could probably clinch a playoff spot if they win. And Philadelphia beats San Antonio. And Honolulu beats Portland. And Denver and Boston lose. Philadelphia and Honolulu are eliminated if they lose. San Antonio will be eliminated if they lose. Then we go over to the Century Conference, where Chicago has the number 1 seed, Baltimore has the 2nd seed, San Diego fell to the 3rd seed, New Orleans has the 4th seed, Pittsburgh has the 5th seed, and San Francisco has the 6th seed. New Orleans can clinch a playoff spot if they beat Miami today, and San Diego will clinch a playoff spot if they beat Seattle later today. But that's it for playoff clinching, and pretty much everyone would be eliminated if they lose and everything else happened bad against them. So yeah, well, except Dallas. Everyone besides Dallas would probably be almost eliminated if they lose and everything else goes against them. So then we look at the schedule for Week 18. First up would be New Orleans going to Baltimore, a big game in the National Conference. Omaha going to Boston, Birmingham going to Buffalo, Columbus going to Chicago, Tampa going to Cincinnati. Another big show in the Century Conference, Minneapolis going to Dallas, El Paso going to Detroit, Houston going to Jacksonville, Denver going to Louisville, Miami going to New Orleans. That'll be a big Century South showdown. San Antonio going to Philadelphia, a game that'll have much significance, and Atlanta going to Pittsburgh. And in the 4 p.m. games, Cleveland going to Las Vegas, Indianapolis going to Los Angeles, Washington going to Oakland, Kansas City going to Oklahoma, Honolulu going to Portland, and San Diego going to Seattle, going to San Diego. And then Sunday night, Manhattan going to San Francisco. And finally, the Monday night game, Milwaukee going to Phoenix. So let's get Week 18 underway. So we go out to M&T Bank Stadium in Baltimore as the Baltimore Charm hosts the Orlando Astros for Baltimore's final home game unless they win the division. And Baltimore would win 34-24. Orlando's running back Frank Evans had 22 attempts, 123 yards and a touchdown. Baltimore's wide receiver Timothy Dawson had 6 receptions, 109 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Baltimore's Raymond McKay had a 93-yard kickoff return. They will meet each other next week in Orlando, which Baltimore will play their final regular season game until the playoffs. Then it's up north to Gillette Stadium in Foxborough, as the Omaha Thunder, who just lost their first game last week at New Orleans, is going to be hosted by the Boston Destroyers. And Omaha would implode again as Boston would win 35-10. Man, what a collapse Omaha's had these last 2 weeks. And they could have won home field advantage if they just won. But they still can clinch a first-round bye if either Washington or Phoenix lose. And Los Angeles, too. But anyways, Boston's quarterback Steven Osborne was 22 of 29 for 201 yards and a touchdown and 2 touchdowns and a pick. Omaha's receiver Stephen Carmola, 5 receptions, 106 yards and a touchdown. Wallace Price had 9 receptions for 102 yards. and Omaha's cornerback Donald Brennan had 11 tackles. What a disaster for Omaha these last 2 weeks. Then it's up to Buffalo in 36 degrees as the Birmingham Hornets visit the Buffalo Sabres. Birmingham trying to maintain their lead over Atlanta and extend it. Despite the cold weather for Birmingham, they won 30-3 in an incredible beating they gave Buffalo as they are officially eliminated from the playoffs. Birmingham's quarterback Marcus Thompson was 20 of 34, 209 yards and 2 touchdowns. And boy, oh boy, Buffalo's quarterback Ricky Bale, 12 of 24, 82 yards, 0 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. That Birmingham defense has become the number 1 defense in the league in terms of turnovers and points allowed. But Buffalo's linebacker Major Woodward had 11 tackles. But Birmingham's cornerback Jacob Taylor had 3 tackles and 2 interceptions. Then it's out to Chicago, where the Columbus Barons are being hosted by the Chicago 71ers. A hard-fought defensive game, but Chicago would win 27-16 as Columbus's quarterback Albert Hedrick was 17 of 26, 198 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Chicago's wide receiver David Tapia had 6 receptions and 117 yards. Another 100-yard day for him. Other than that, nothing else. Then we go down to Cincinnati as the Cincinnati Colts, who just got their huge win over Honolulu last week, hosted the Tampa Tropics, who just won their first game ever last week. And Cincinnati would make it 2 in a row as they destroyed Tampa 29-7. Cincinnati's running back Quentin Peterson was 20 attempts, 112 yards and a touchdown. There was 7 sacks this game and 4 by Tampa, but still was not enough to stop Cincinnati. Then it's down to Dallas as the Dallas Stars host the Minneapolis Kitsune, a rematch from a couple weeks ago where Dallas absolutely destroyed the Kitsune in their home 44-6. Minneapolis needs to win to stay ahead in the playoffs, and lucky for them, they finally get Samuel Clark back from his injury, hoping he would revive that terrible offense these last couple weeks. It wasn't enough though, as Dallas would win 20-6. Minneapolis' defense played just as good, but that offense, although it was good to have Samuel Clark back, he still struggled, as Dallas' quarterback Troy Hill was 17 of 29, 198 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their running back Justin Becker, 20 attempts, 109 yards. But Minneapolis' linebacker Francis Negrete had 12 tackles, and Eric Witt had 11 tackles. Their defense played hard, but wasn't enough. And Minneapolis, although not eliminated, they're getting closer and closer to be eliminated from the playoffs. Then we go up to Detroit as the El Paso Mustangs are visiting the Detroit Engines. El Paso would get things started with a 94-yard kickoff return to begin the game, and they scored 21 unanswered points to win 31-17. El Paso's backup quarterback Dennis Milton was spot on in this game. 17 of 31, 231 yards and 2 touchdowns. And their wide receiver Alfred Phillips was 3 receptions, 103 yards. Detroit's wide receiver Joseph Chavez, 6 receptions, 103 yards and a touchdown. And Detroit's linebacker Robert Bryson had 11 tackles. And Detroit has now lost 9 in a row. Then we go down south to Jacksonville as the Jacksonville Bucks host the Houston Steers, who need to win out to have any, and I mean any, shot at making the playoffs, and even that probably wouldn't even be enough. It would be a bittersweet day for Houston, as although they won 30-16 and went back to 8-8 after winning 3 in a row, with Dallas's win earlier, they were officially eliminated from the playoffs, so that's very tough to swallow. As Houston's quarterback Stephen Hargrove was 17 of 28, 229 yards and 3 touchdowns. Their running back Tracy Martinez was 29 attempts, 110 yards, and a reception touchdown. Jacksonville's linebacker Desmond Haggard had 16 attempts, 102 yards. Their wide receiver Emil Galliant, 4 receptions, 103 yards, and a touchdown. Houston's strong safety George Forrest had 10 tackles, and their quarterback Billy Chafee had 6 tackles and 2 interceptions. Then it's out to Louisville as the Louisville Saints, who have now won 2 in a row, host the Denver Miners. And Zachary Ellis is going to go up against a team that got him his very first playoff game many weeks ago when they hosted them. It was a hard-fought defensive battle, but Denver would win 20-17. Neither quarterback did really good. Zachary Ellis had a really bad day, but they still managed to win. Louisville's Scott Bueno had 4 receptions, 149 yards. His third straight 100-yard game, so not bad for him. And Denver's linebacker Dale Ramey had 10 tackles. Then we go south to the Superdome in New Orleans as the New Orleans Jazz host the Miami Sharks, And if New Orleans knocks off Miami, they would be eliminated from the playoffs, and New Orleans would clinch a playoff spot. And New Orleans would blow it as Miami would crush them 34-13. After New Orleans went downfield to score the first touchdown, Miami would go on to score 34 unanswered points, and New Orleans would not score again until the final minute in the game. Jeez. Miami's quarterback Anthony McCormick was 16 of 23, 203 yards, and 4 touchdowns. He shredded at New Orleans' secondary. New Orleans linebacker, though, James Williams, was 21 of 37, 272 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Miami's linebacker Anthony Lewis had 11 tackles, and New Orleans' linebacker Jeffrey Cornell had 10 tackles. Although Miami won, they still got a lot of things got to go for them to have any shot at getting a playoff spot, but beating New Orleans was a good thing for them. Then it's up north a little as the Kansas City Hammerheads visit the Oklahoma Oilers, a rematch from a couple weeks ago where Kansas City crushed them at home, but it's a game that would have no significance for them as they were both eliminated earlier today when Dallas won. And Kansas City would sweep Oklahoma this year, 28-21, and they had to pull a comeback in the last couple minutes to pull it off. Oklahoma's running back Ricky Roller had 14 attempts, 107 yards. Kansas City's linebacker Paul Wakefield had 12 tackles, and Oklahoma's cornerback Ray Durkin had 10 tackles. And then it's out to Philadelphia as the Philadelphia Hawks host the San Antonio Longhorns. If either team loses, they would be officially eliminated from the playoffs, so neither team wants to lose today. And San Antonio would win 32-21. They had to pull off a comeback, but they managed to do it, as San Antonio's wide receiver Scott Lopez had 7 receptions, 106 yards. Philadelphia's wide receiver Brian Coombs had 5 receptions, 113 yards, and a touchdown. Their linebacker James Harlan had 12 tackles, and Rick Lopez had 12 tackles as well. And with the loss, Philadelphia was officially eliminated from the playoffs. Then we get to a game that I thought at the very first 6 weeks of the season was going to be a preview of PFA Bowl 1 between the Atlanta Trojans and the Pittsburgh Blitz. So far, that doesn't look that's the case, but let's see how they did today. And Atlanta would continue the debacle as they would lose 31-21 to Pittsburgh. After starting 6-0, Atlanta is now 3-7 the last 10 games, and Pittsburgh scored first in the game with a pick 6. Oh, that's not a good way to start off for Atlanta. But Atlanta's running back Kenneth Dixon had 21 attempts, 103 yards, and a touchdown. Their wide receiver Joseph Emons had 5 receptions, 113 yards. And Pittsburgh's linebacker Richard Lathan had 13 tackles. Then we go out to Las Vegas as we had another early possible PFA Bowl preview with the Cleveland Bulldogs visiting the Las Vegas Gamblers. Man, how these teams have not done good all this year as we thought they were going to be. It was a defensive struggle as Las Vegas would win 13-20 and give Cleveland their first losing season. There was 8 sacks in this game and 5 by Las Vegas. And Las Vegas' free safety Mark Arnold had 9 tackles, 1 sack, and an interception. Then we go out to Los Angeles as the undefeated team at home, Los Angeles Angels, host the Indianapolis Express. And if Los Angeles wins, they would clinch a playoff spot. But Los Angeles would blow it and lose their first game at home as Indianapolis has won 31-17. Indianapolis, after starting off 2-10, is now 5-11. They are on a roll as their quarterback Rodney Sanders was 20 of 32, 262 yards, 3 touchdowns and an interception. Their wide receiver Robert Monaghan had 7 receptions, 110 yards and a touchdown. Their Los Angeles wide receiver Leo Dennis had 6 receptions, 106 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Indianapolis' stingy defense this game had 6 sacks. What an incredible game they had. Then we go up north to Oakland as the Oakland Majors host the Washington Americans. In a defensive struggle, Washington would win 16-6. No real highlights though, as Washington's quarterback Roy Rice was 25 of 40 for 256 yards and a touchdown, and their linebacker Eric Donald had 11 tackles. And Oakland's backup quarterback had a broken hip, and he's going to miss the rest of the season. So their 2 top quarterbacks are out for the season to injuries. Oh boy, they're going to get a new QB soon for that, especially since they got to go to Washington next week. Then we go even more north as the Portland Dragons host the Honolulu Phantoms. Portland will sweep Honolulu to get their first win season and officially knock Honolulu out of the playoffs. And Portland's running back Bruce Morrissey, had 14 receptions, 113 yards and a touchdown. Honolulu's wide receiver Palmer Negron had 6 receptions, 106 yards and 2 touchdowns. Hawaii's linebacker Wilson Sharp had another great day with 13 tackles. Portland's linebacker Stephen Fowler had 10 tackles. And Portland's Lupe Pride was cornerback, had 1 tackle and 2 interceptions. Then we go south to San Diego, where the San Diego Rays host the Seattle Quakes. And if San Diego wins, they would clinch a playoff spot. And San Diego would blow it again as they got crushed by Seattle 42-13. In the last 2 games, San Diego was outscored 26-72. Ooh, especially blowing 2 chances to clinch a playoff spot. Seattle's backup quarterback Ken Rodriguez was 18 of 30, 231 yards and 3 touchdowns. He's gotten 5 touchdowns and no picks in these first 2 games. Their running back Wilbert Brownie had 16 receptions for 104 yards, his first 100-yard running game. Their wide receiver Eric Benjamin had 4 receptions, 106 yards and 2 touchdowns. And San Diego's wide receiver David Seton had 4 receptions, 106 yards as well. Seattle's linebacker James Torres had 11 tackles. And their free safety Hector Lee, 1 tackle, 3 interceptions, and 2 pick sixes too. Unbelievable collapse San Diego had in this game. Then we go back up north to Santa Clara as the San Francisco Union host the Manhattan Greens on Sunday night. And with a win, San Francisco would not only take a lead in the Century West, but would officially knock Las Vegas out of the playoffs. San Francisco was up 27-0 and never looked back as they would win 33-25 and officially knock Las Vegas out of the playoffs. Manhattan's quarterback Jamie Norwood, who missed last week, was 14 of 24, 301 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. And Ruben Williams, San Francisco's backup quarterback, was 22 of 29, 271 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's been absolutely spot on in these last 3 starts. Their running back Anthony Marks had 29 attempts, 107 yards and a touchdown. And then Manhattan's wide receivers Lawrence Irons, 4 receptions, 140 yards and a touchdown. And Bruce Cromer had 2 receptions, 111 yards and a touchdown. And their free safety Robert Draymond had 10 tackles. And linebacker James Gonzalez had 10 tackles, but it was not enough to stop San Francisco. Then we go down south to Glendale for the Monday night game and a rematch from last week, as the Phoenix Storm host the Milwaukee Lakers, who lost to Phoenix last week 41-17. And with the win, Phoenix would officially clinch a playoff berth. And that is exactly what would happen, as Phoenix would win 24-14 to officially clinch their first playoff appearance. And Milwaukee would be get their first losing season. Milwaukee was up 14 unanswered at first, but then Phoenix came back to score 24 unanswered points to win the game. Milwaukee's quarterback Herman McLendon was really good though, 19 of 24, 232 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was much better than his first performance last week. And their Phoenix's running back David Sexton had 27 attempts, 120 yards. Milwaukee's linebacker Richard Herron had another great game with 14 tackles. And their strong safety Brian Morales had 10 tackles. So with that, here we take a look at the standings after week 18, which is 2 weeks left. Washington still maintains their lead over Boston in the Century East by 3 games. Well, National East, and they're not going to lose that. Omaha's lead against Denver has shrunk to 5, even though it won't matter since they won the National Central. Birmingham's lead against Atlanta has grown by 2 in the National South. And Phoenix's lead against Los Angeles has grown to 1 as they clinched the National West. They're supposed to clinch a wild card spot, not a division. Baltimore has a game lead still over Pittsburgh in the Century East. Chicago has a 3-game lead still over Minneapolis in the Century Central. Dallas has the tiebreaker over New Orleans in the Century South. And now San Francisco has the tiebreaker lead over San Diego in the Century West. So now we take a look at the playoff stands in the National Conference, as Omaha still has the number 1 spot. Washington has gone to the 2nd spot now. Phoenix, although they won, they fell to the 3rd seed. Birmingham's now the 4th seed still. Los Angeles still the 5th seed. And Portland managed to get back, is now the 6th seed. And only Atlanta, Denver, San Antonio, and Boston remain to possibly get those last playoff spots. Now, as I said earlier, Omaha can clinch a first-round bye if either Washington loses or Phoenix loses. And they can still clinch home field advantage if they win or both of them lose. it's all Omaha's fault if they lose this first home field advantage. Phoenix will clinch the National West if they win and Los Angeles loses. Birmingham will clinch the National South if they win or Atlanta loses. Los Angeles will clinch a playoff spot if they win. And Portland will clinch a playoff spot if they win and all the 9-7 teams lose. Then we go over to the much more interesting Century Conference, which, oh boy, there's a whole bunch of things going on now. As you can see, Chicago still has the number 1 spot, 13-3. Baltimore has the 2nd spot. Dallas went up to the 3rd seed. San Francisco got up to the 4th seed. Pittsburgh still remains at the 5th seed. And San Diego has fallen to the 6th seed. And just think 2 weeks ago, they were tying Chicago for the number 1 spot. And only New Orleans, Minneapolis, and Miami fight on for the last spots. Chicago will clinch first round bye if they win, or Dallas, San Diego, San Francisco, and New Orleans lose. And they could also clinch home field advantage if they win and Baltimore and Pittsburgh lose. Baltimore can clinch the Century East if they win and Pittsburgh loses. Dallas will clinch a playoff spot and the Century South if they beat New Orleans next week. And San Francisco will clinch a playoff spot and the Century West if they beat San Diego. Pittsburgh will clinch a playoff spot if they win, and San Diego still can clinch a playoff spot if they beat San Francisco. But, wow, other than that, man, I can't wait for these last 2 weeks in the Century Conference. And both Miami and Minneapolis will be eliminated if they lose. So now we look at the schedule for Week 19, as first up would be Jacksonville going to Atlanta, and then a very, very important National Conference game, the Phoenix Storm going to the Birmingham Hornets. A very hard defensive game that will be. And then another important playoff game with playoff implications as the Portland Dragons visit the Chicago 71ers. Then a very, very, very important Century South game. New Orleans going to Dallas. With Dallas winning, they'll clinch the division. Then Oklahoma going to Detroit. And then Miami going to New Orleans. Another important game in the Century South. Seattle going to Kansas City. Indianapolis going to Louisville. Omaha going to Milwaukee. Remember, Omaha needs to win. That's it. They can clinch home field advantage. Pittsburgh going to Minneapolis, another important Century Conference game. Baltimore going to Orlando, which would be their final game of the season until the playoffs. Los Angeles going to Philadelphia. Oakland going to Washington after they just played them this week. San Antonio going to Tampa, And then the 4 p.m. games will be Columbus going to Denver. Buffalo going to Manhattan, and then a Portland Century West game with either team going to the playoffs, whoever wins. San Francisco going to San Diego, and then the Sunday night game, Boston going to Honolulu, and then the Monday night game, a game that we all thought was going to be a very, very important Century West game, but turned out to be San Francisco and San Diego instead, as Las Vegas will host El Paso, El Paso will play their final game of the season. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, I can't wait for Week 19 as we get closer and closer to getting ready for the playoffs. What incredible action we'll see next week. So tune in very soon, hopefully soon, for Week 19. Done.